Thanks for inviting us in.
Thanks for coming.
Look, first of all, let's start with something really basic.
Okay.
Explain who Okra Bio are.
Okay, I should be able to get this one.
Yeah.
So Okra Bio are an RNA medicines company with a focus on chronic liver diseases. So liver disease, as you know, one of the top 10 global killers, been a real challenge for drug developers to date, primarily for three big reasons. The first is the biology of liver disease is still pretty poorly understood, which is why we use a lot of new technologies, sequencing, imaging AI, tools to really try and understand what's going wrong and find better ways to treat the disease. The second problem we're addressing is that the preclinical models, so the animal models that are typically used in drug development, they don't work. We've tried loads of liver drugs in patients and they've all failed, but they've all worked in a mouse. So something's wrong with the mouse model, you know? So we try to work in exclusively using human tissues to test out our new medicines to ensure that they'll actually work in human beings when we take them into clinical testing. And then the last piece of it is that we focus on smaller niche disease areas to begin before going after big, complex chronic disease. We try to focus on getting proof of concept in a kind of small trial, like in a liver transplant setting, to demonstrate that our medicines actually work, and then ultimately go on and kind of move after larger and more complex diseases thereafter. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So there's one part of it that needs clarification in my mind.
Yes.
I probably know more than the regular person when it comes to liver disease, but certainly nowhere near the scientific level that you hold. RNA. Yeah. What are RNA treatments?
Great question. So this is, to take it back to what's called the central dogma of biology. I'm trying to give your audience a little bit of a biology lesson here. The way biology works is that there's DNA, which is basically the code of life. It encodes for the proteins that go and do all the work so that we can move and eat and digest food. All of that work is done by proteins, but the DNA is basically the fundamental code. And RNA basically transcribes DNA into proteins. And when proteins work, brilliant, everything works fine, but sometimes proteins are misregulated or don't actually perform the function they're intended to do and can cause diseases. So by drugging RNA, you essentially try to intervene between the translation of DNA to the actual, to the protein itself. So it's another way of developing medicines that it's not a typical pill that basically introduces or tries to attack proteins more generally. You're actually trying to intercept that translation of the code of life.
As I understand it, the RNA piece is the new piece in this, right? It's the bit that's perhaps linked to technology.
Yeah, so RNA is basically the type of drug that we develop. And the benefit of RNA is it's incredibly fast. So I don't know if you followed the COVID vaccines, they say they were invented in 48 hours. As soon as they knew the sequence, they could basically program the drug to address the treatment. So that's one of the reasons that there's a lot of excitement around this new approach to developing medicines. You can, once you know the gene that you think is driving the disease, you can within a matter of days actually manufacture an RNA treatment to address that particular gene. So I'm probably getting a little bit complex here, but what's traditional drug discovery use things as known as small molecules, and they take a long time of optimization, years of optimization to address a certain protein that you think is a disease-causing protein. With RNA, if you think you know what the gene is that's driving the disease, you can very rapidly design an RNA and then test it out and see if your hypothesis was right. So that ability to move really quickly kind of is a bit like how the tech world works, in that you can iterate and fail fast. That gene might be driving it. Let's try it. See, it didn't work. Back to the drawing board. Let's try another product. Didn't work. And we think that's going to really dramatically improve the probabilities of success when we go into human testing, because we won't have spent 3 years working on a gene that we don't really know is going to work or not. We actually can iterate through different hypotheses very quickly.
Look, I don't want to jump ahead several steps for myself, and I think it would be very easy to. And this might be treading over the ground that we've just spoken about. Yeah. But specifically then, how is technology helping your team develop new treatments? Great
question. So we use technology in a few different ways. The primary way we use it is to try and answer that question about the biology. What gene or genes are driving the disease process and could potentially be ways to reverse or halt or treat the disease itself. So we use a whole range of different data sets, from what's called transcriptomics, so looking at the actual, if we take a human sample and we we can perform sequencing on it. We can analyze what RNAs are upregulated or active in certain locations. And we can take a lot of that. We build up huge amounts of, terabytes of transcriptomic data studying changes in RNA and then mapping that to within the tissue samples that we get. How does the histology look? Do we see a lot of disease severity in certain locations? Does the disease seem to be early or later stage? And then we can also map it to the actual clinical, what the doctor is saying about the patient before they take that biopsy. The doctor's saying the patient seems quite ill or seems quite well, it seems actually perfectly healthy. And then we can use all this sort of, fundamental biology through to histology, through to actual clinical variables and say, let's try and study that using computational techniques, using AI, using ML, and come up with new hypotheses around, actually, we really think this gene, it seems to be upregulated at this process of the disease, at this stage of the disease. Therefore, we think it could really have an application for developing a medicine to reverse the disease. And then, when we believe that, we've got a hypothesis across our scientific teams, we'll within days print an RNA medicine, and then we'll take it into an actual human liver to test it out and seeing if we are actually true if our hypothesis is correct that this gene is playing a role. So technology makes us way smarter, and it also makes us a lot faster at iterating through hypotheses. I guess a way to analogize it is really this. It makes us smarter, faster, and ultimately cheaper, which is a big important.
No, look, I was about to say, because smarter and faster, but cheaper?
But cheaper too.
Significantly cheaper?
Significantly cheaper. It's a big we all know the statistic that drug development takes $2 billion and 10 years to actually see success. A large part of that $2 billion is because you've tried tens, if not 20s of things that have gone to probably the $50 to $100 million mark and failed miserably. So therefore, you're taking this aggregate cost of all the products you've tested to get to an actual successful drug. What we're saying is we want to fail really early in the pipeline before we spend a lot of money. We want to try out lots and lots of drug candidates in our human liver model and fail fast. So when we actually decide which is going to really make a big difference in the clinic, the probability of that drug product actually working is way higher. So it costs us a lot less on aggregate by doing this iterative sort of early development. And ultimately, the thesis is that it's going to have a higher probability of improving the patients who are enrolled in the trials by virtue of testing in human-based models rather than animal models, which don't frickin' work.
So everything that you're saying, to me would sound like it's perfect for the medical community.
Yeah.
So how can we help you in this sector, and not just Okra Bio, but if you're working in obesity or you're working in any number of different diseases, work more effectively with the medical community to bring about the realization of the outcomes that are potentially there?
Yeah, well, there's a few different things I think medicine can learn from technology, and technology can help to influence medicine. Some of it is basic organizational, and the culture of tech has been very fast, it's been very innovative, it thinks big. That is sort of, I think the medical sector can learn a little bit from the tech sector in that way. The other thing the tech sector does very well that I think would do a service to medicine to improve upon is actually speaking to the world about the work that they do. Scientists and doctors tend to be kind of conservative, reserved folks and don't necessarily do a great job of spreading the word of their innovation and their work. And as a result, over the last couple of decades, trust in science has been massively eroded. Obviously, there's a conflation of reasons why that is, but the ability to tell and talk about the research that they're doing and how it's come together and why it will ultimately be impactful and improve human health, I think is a really important thing that medicine needs to step into and lean into as a result of 15% of the US population still not having taken a COVID vaccine, to build trust. And I think the technology sector has done a phenomenal job at really integrating popular culture into its work. Even shows like Silicon Valley and these things, they make it normal. They make it like human, this whole process of innovation. And I think that's what I think the medical community could do a better job of making it human, how drugs and other things are made, and ultimately.
Is trust a two-way street though? On that collaboration piece, I suppose, between tech and medtech or medicine, is the scientific community, are they Or could you accuse them of not trusting the innovations that your sector is coming out with? Are they suspicious of the breakthroughs perhaps that a company like yours could make?
The scientific sector is in the...
As in medicine, as in, you're saying that people don't trust the science, don't trust medicine.
Yeah.
If you're in a legacy institution, if you're in a very academic setting traditionally, is there some suspicion towards the breakthroughs that perhaps a med tech startup could make here in a science park?
Yeah, I think academia and industry, particularly in Oxford at least, have a pretty fluid relationship. I think university systems can sometimes be a bit constrain the spin out of companies, but more generally speaking, scientists respect and respond well to scientists, particularly.
So it's not a barrier.
No, I don't think it's a barrier. I think I'm more thinking about the general public. I think really don't trust science as much as would have been historically the case, and that seems to be a trend, particularly in the US, that's becoming more and more prevalent. With a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and we're seeing a revival of mumps and this sort of crazy stuff. Like, we know the vaccines work, like, take the vaccines. But anyway, I shouldn't, each to their own, everyone's got the right to decide. But like, I think part of that breakdown of trust and distrust of new therapeutic innovations is it's partially political, but it's partially because the sector doesn't really do a great job of talking about the work that it's doing.
Which I found like slightly mind-blowing, because when we were both at Web Summit in November and I discovered that was the first year that they had a health tech track.
Yeah.
That surprised me. We've been talking about DeepMind, and we've been talking about, how technology and data sets might be able to prevent hospitalizations, prevent disease for quite some time. It sounds like it's proximity bias. It sounds like we're talking amongst ourselves, but not doing a good job of talking to the world.
Could not agree more. The scientists and the scientific sector tends to be very insular, and we love to debate each other about, very niche kind of scientific innovations. We don't do a great job of making it simple and talking to the wider world in the way that I think tech does a phenomenal job of. Like, Web Summit is a great example of this. It's like Hollywood. I've never, they really make a big sort of splash. They bring in Eva Longoria. They make it very sort of accessible. I shouldn't say it's quite an expensive place to go, but at least they make it kind of fun and entertaining in a way that I think science could learn from. You don't want to understate the profound impacts of medicine and the severity and real life experiences of patients, but you also want to make it an inclusive and a more accessible field to the wider public. And in that way, I would hope it would help to bring people along the journey in a way that tech, I think, has done a pretty good job of.
I suppose one way of getting through to the wider public is to make them aware of the potential to transform people's lives at a very real basis through some of the technologies that we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Not just liver disease, but obesity, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like liver disease and obesity and a lot of these chronic diseases are stigmatized in a really unfair and unhelpful way, quite frankly. Liver disease is oftentimes associated almost exclusively with alcoholism, where we know that's a small minority, and even a small minority of the patients who suffer from liver disease. There's a lot of genetic influences. There's a lot of sort of wider things that contribute to the development of liver disease. And even if it is alcoholism, that's also a very socioeconomic influenced problem that contributes to the development of that. So I think we as a society, in an unfair way, stigmatize the indication. And another example is obesity. And liver disease and obesity are very interrelated in that the liver is sort of the brain of your metabolism. It helps you sort of break down and metabolize the food you eat, and has a kind of close association with obesity. And obesity is the same thing. We know that if you are of a certain BMI, you are dramatically at a higher risk of having a heart attack. It literally will reduce your life expectancy quite significantly. And yet, we're still stigmatizing medical innovation that helps to prevent the development of obesity, even though it will ultimately save a lot of people's lives. And as a society, we view it in a very negative way, but I think that needs to change it's not public health data has shown us for the last 100 years that telling people to eat more or eat less and move more just doesn't change outcomes at all. We still have the same problem. So we need to think about other ways to ultimately help people improve the health of people who have these.
Is that societal stigma a tangible challenge for your business?
I would say, yeah. And it plays backwards. So if you think about our business, right, what do we need to succeed? We obviously need great innovation, great science. But we also need great funding because it's an expensive game to be in. Mm-hmm. And if you're putting yourself in the shoes of an investor evaluates a whole host of different industries, from tech to real estate to biotech. And if they're looking at biotech, they're looking at different disease areas where they think there'll be people who will ultimately pay for the products that companies like us hope to develop. And if you're working in a space that's stigmatized more generally, there's a concern that governments and payers and insurance companies won't reimburse treatments for disease, like obesity, which has radically shifted over the last 3 to 5 years. But obesity was always seen as a lifestyle disease. So investors assumed, even if you had a treatment, payers wouldn't reimburse it because they would assume, doctors would say, just move. You don't need a drug, you need to move more and eat less. And that's changed quite substantially now. We're seeing actual medical treatments for obesity getting approved, and they're having this huge interest from the wider public because it's not only making us all look better, which we all like to do, but also improves healthcare outcomes more generally and reduces a whole lot of other side effects that come with obesity. So that is starting to shift now. But for us in liver disease, there is still a sense that there is if your payers and your governments and your society more generally feels it shouldn't be treated, the likelihood of reimbursement is lower, and therefore the investment that you need to fund innovation for these fields is lower.
So what's the solution to that? How do you get investors to see past that stigma and that bias against the idea that somehow someone has drank their way into this problem, eaten their way into this problem, sat on the sofa, and therefore it's their responsibility?
Well, I think fundamentally you need great science that can demonstrate that it's going to work. You also need some reason to believe that it's possible to treat this indication in the clinic. And in liver disease, we have, again, just very recently seen some really positive signs, which piques investors' interests. And then more generally, as you alluded to, we do need to break these stigmas that alcoholics don't deserve treatments, or other unfair views of society that society sometimes holds. Like, if a lung transplant is never withheld from a smoker because of smoking, but liver disease is one of the few sort of very clear cases where there are strict guidances around these types of things. So I guess just more generally, we need to rethink some of the stigmas associated with the disease, and ultimately encourage and shine a light on, like what you're doing here today, a really important disease area that ultimately affects millions of people.
As the cost comes down, I suppose in part due to technology, how much easier does that make it for the medical community to collaborate?
I think with anything, as you improve efficiency, costs come down. With anything, when you improve costs coming down, you democratize and give a wider access to contribution to these types of innovations. And we as a company do a lot around trying to open source the data sets that we develop to give wider scientific community access to some of the insights and innovations that we've come up with. I think all of that contributes to a momentum to help shift the needle.
I suppose, is it a case that you might have experts in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world, who might have found it difficult to work together, who now see barriers being removed because of that, because, as we said, time and costs coming down, that now are talking to each other, perhaps in a way that they weren't 5 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see these amazing innovations that are becoming outsourced, like DeepMind's AlphaFold 2, this insane, biomedical research for studying protein structures to enhance and speed up the development of new medicines and the understanding of biology. All of that really helps to catalyze interest in the space. One of the things DeepMind did really well is it just beautiful brand and kind of messaging around that innovation, and it helps attract. And by doing that, by making science and medicine, this really inspiring and just profoundly impactful, shining a light on that profound impact, you attract beautiful, wonderful minds like yourselves and like other people who maybe wouldn't have looked at this part of the wider economy before. And you bring a lot of that talent that gravitates towards the ecosystem. And then all of a sudden, you have this catalytic effect that speeds up and enhances the innovation ecosystem, and ultimately leads to more medicines, leads to better outcomes for patients, leads to a healthier society. You're
in two camps.
Okay.
You're both tech and scientific.
Yeah.
When you find yourselves talking to a technology audience, What are the messages that actually, the stuff that does work? Because you've talked very positively about technology and, if medtech and if science could learn from technology, sure. But there must be times where you think, come on, guys, the scientific community does this really well. If technology could look at this, then the collaboration across the sector would be so much better.
This is the perennial sort of challenge. And I think about it because I spend a lot of my time talking to investors around why they should fund our research and our programs. And there's two sort of camps from an investor perspective. There's sort of the folks who come originally from technology and are getting into biology. And then there's the more traditional biopharmaceutical investors who are kind of looking at this whole technology stack and saying, don't really understand this, what's going on here? And the message to both is quite simple. We ultimately increase the efficiency of our research and ultimately enhance the probability that we will successfully and cost effectively develop medicines for important indications. But the technology sector doesn't necessarily understand the context of how medicines are commercialized and brought to market and manufactured, because it's all software. And in that world, so it's a slightly different beast. And then the more biopharma folks are looking at it and saying, I don't really know what all this black box technology stuff is really doing for you. Show me the drug and show me how you're going to get it reimbursed. So trying to marry those two worlds is a challenge. But I think if you sit at that intersection, you get a lot of the benefits and the wisdom of both. And ultimately can use that to really enhance your probability of success.
And as a last question, how long do you think it might be before you can realize some of these outcomes so that patients sat in hospital can see the fruits of your labor?
That is an incredibly profound question, and we're really ambitiously moving towards our first human testing next year, which it would be a really monumental sort of achievement. For me, as I think about having sort of gone on the journey over the last 4 years or so, to be able to actually, as you said, dose a patient and to tell them about all the work we've done to get to this product that we think will ultimately improve their lives and improve the state of the disease. So I'm really excited about this next 6 months. Actually is quite consequential as we're beginning to hone in on exactly what the therapeutic product will look like, and then we'll do all of the safety and regulatory workups for the next year after, and then we could be 18 months, 24 months time actually looking in someone's eyes and saying, we spent a lot of time, a lot of effort really trying to make this to improve your life, and hopefully we'll have a really positive impact.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.